There's a truth about conflict that almost no one teaches you. It's not about being right. It's not about being fair. It's not even about winning in the traditional sense. In any arena where power is at stake, whether it's a boardroom, a political stage, a relationship, or a whispered conversation in the dark, the real contest is for control of the frame. And here's the part most people never see. The first move you make when someone challenges you almost always decides who wins. History is full of empires, leaders, and reputations that collapsed not because they were truly guilty of anything, but because they fell into the trap of defending themselves. From Caesar to corporate CEOs, from generals to politicians, the moment they tried to clear their name instead of controlling the narrative, they handed their enemies the advantage. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He understood that power is perception, and perception is fragile. Too fragile to be placed in the hands of anyone but yourself. When you're accused, challenged, or attacked, the temptation to defend yourself is primal. It comes from the human need to be understood, to be vindicated, to erase the discomfort of someone thinking ill of you. But in the hierarchy of power, that instinct is a liability. Because the second you start explaining, you are no longer setting the terms, you are accepting theirs. You've moved from offense to defense, from control to reaction, from being the one who frames reality to the one trapped inside someone else's frame. The truly dangerous people, the ones you remember, the ones you hesitate to challenge, never rush to explain themselves. They don't scramble to prove their innocence. They don't chase approval. Instead, they control the tempo, the room, and the emotional climate. They understand that silence can be more intimidating than an argument, that detachment can look like superiority, and that mystery is more powerful than any clarification. Before you learn tactics, before you memorize clever retorts, you have to burn this into your mind. In power games, your defense is not your protection. It's their weapon. And if you give them that weapon, they will use it to define you. Now, let's step into the moment itself, the split second when you're attacked, and see why almost everyone loses before the first word leaves their mouth. There's a moment, barely long enough to notice, when someone calls you out, questions your motives, challenges your worth, or throws a sharp accusation at you in front of others. It could be a direct attack, a sly jab, or a remark wrapped in false concern. And in that instant, the average person does exactly what they've been trained to do since childhood. They defend themselves. I didn't mean it like that. That's not what I was trying to say. You misunderstood me. I swear, I'm not that kind of person. It sounds reasonable. It sounds human. It sounds like the right thing to do. After all, aren't we taught that misunderstandings are fixed by explaining ourselves? But in the realm of power, that's the first and fatal mistake. The second you defend yourself, you announce to the room that you believe the other person has the authority to judge you. You accept the frame they've given you and step into the role they've scripted. The accused. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology could explain it. In power games, perception is not just important, it is everything. The moment you flinch, the moment you react, the moment you show that the attack landed, you stop being a figure of authority and become a figure under scrutiny. The crowd no longer wonders if the accusation is true. They watch how you squirm, and the squirm becomes the story. And here's the brutal truth. If they see you flinch, they don't see a victim. They see blood. In politics, in business, in personal relationships, the first one to bleed loses more than just the point. They lose the frame, the psychological high ground. The man who explains lowers himself. The man who doesn't forces the world to fill the silence for him. And more often than not, they overestimate him in the process. Think about the most powerful people you've ever encountered. Not the loudest, not the most charming, the ones who could hold a room with a single glance. They rarely defended themselves when attacked. They didn't rush to correct the record or win over their critics. They let the accusation hang in the air, untouched, while their presence suggested something deeper. I am above this. In that split second, you have two choices: react or control. Reaction feels natural, but it hands away your leverage. Control feels unnatural at first. It means fighting the urge to speak, resisting the pull of your own ego, and accepting that the silence will feel heavy. But that heaviness doesn't crush you. It crushes them. Because the one who throws the stone and gets no reaction begins to question their aim. They wonder if they miscalculated, if they've exposed themselves as petty, emotional, or insecure. That's why this moment matters so much. The split second after an attack is not just a social exchange. It's the opening move in a psychological battle. And in that battle, the one who controls the frame controls the outcome. You can defend yourself and look smaller. Or you can stay silent. Stay still and make them explain themselves instead. From here, we move to the first unshakable law of power. He who explains submits. Machiavelli would tell you this: the second you explain yourself, you've already lowered your position. Explanation is not neutral. It is not simply sharing your side of the story. In the eyes of the room, explanation is a signal. It says, I acknowledge your right to question me. I accept your authority to demand an answer. And once you grant that authority, you're no longer the one in control. Power operates on frames, unspoken structures that define who has the upper hand in any exchange. Whoever sets the frame decides what counts as truth, what counts as evidence, and what counts as weakness. The moment you explain, you're not setting the frame. You're trapped inside it. You're playing their game on their terms, by their rules. And that's why you lose. The strong understand something the average person never will. In a contest of perception, silence can be more commanding than any defense. Silence leaves your opponent with nothing to push against. They came to watch you dance for your reputation, to make you burn energy proving yourself, to force you to plead your case. When you refuse, they have to fill the silence themselves. And the more they fill it, the more desperate they look. Imagine two generals on a battlefield. One is accused by his rival of cowardice in front of the troops. The first general immediately steps forward, delivering a long speech about his courage, listing past victories, swearing loyalty to the cause. The second general says nothing. He stands tall, unmoved, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. The soldiers shift in their seats. The rival's voice starts to sound shrill. The absence of defense becomes a presence in itself, a wall no one can scale. Why does this work? Because humans are wired to interpret stillness as confidence and reaction as insecurity. The one who remains still projects an image of certainty. If I were guilty, I would be scrambling. If I were weak, I would be trying to convince you otherwise. Without you saying a word, the crowd begins to defend you in their own minds. This is the brutal law. He who explains submits, not because the explanation is weak, but because explaining accepts their frame. It sends a message, subtle but deadly, that their opinion matters enough to address, that their accusation has weight. A Machiavellian strategist refuses to grant that weight. And here's where it becomes dangerous for your opponents. When you don't respond, they don't get closure. They start replaying the moment in their heads, wondering why you didn't bite. They question their own judgment. They ask others for validation, but the crowd isn't sure either, because they didn't see you look rattled. The seed of doubt they tried to plant in your reputation has now taken root in their own mind. People defend themselves because they want to be understood. They believe that if they just explain enough, clarify enough, repeat themselves enough, they will be vindicated. But vindication is a myth in power games. Those who hate you will twist your words. Those who envy you will ignore your logic. And those who watch from the sidelines will remember the performance more than the facts. That's why clarity is for therapy. Control is for power. The goal is not to be understood. The goal is to be untouchable. If the price of being untouchable is to remain misunderstood, the Machiavellian pays it without hesitation. From here, the question becomes, if you don't defend yourself, what do you do instead? And the answer is the next layer of strategy, the mirror. If you refuse to defend yourself, you can do more than just hold your ground. You can make the attack work against the one who launched it. This is where the Machiavellian turns the blade. Instead of blocking the strike, you let it pass. Then use its momentum to cut the attacker instead. The method is simple in theory, but devastating in execution. You turn the accusation into a mirror. The moment someone attacks you, they're revealing something about themselves. An insecurity, a frustration, a belief they desperately want confirmed. When you don't fight the accusation, but instead hold it up like a reflection, you force them to see it. And most people cannot stand the sight. Example: someone says, "You're manipulative." The average person rushes to say, "No, I'm not. You've misunderstood me." The Machiavellian? They lean back, let a small pause stretch, and say in a calm, flat voice, "Interesting that you see it that way." In that instant, you've done three things. You've refused to validate their frame. You've suggested, without saying it, that their accusation says more about them than about you. You've left them carrying the emotional weight of their own statement. And here's the psychological twist. Most accusations are projection. When someone calls you arrogant, they've often been nursing their own insecurity about status. When they call you fake, they've often been performing for approval themselves. When they call you controlling, they're often frustrated that they can't influence you. By turning the accusation into a mirror, you make that projection visible. Not to the crowd, but to them. That's why it stings so deeply. The mirror works because it robs the attacker of their expected payoff. They wanted to see you defend yourself, maybe even lose your composure. They wanted the crowd to watch you work for your reputation. Instead, the crowd sees something different. The attacker delivering a jab, you barely reacting, and the attacker starting to look unsettled. The more they push, the more it seems like they're the one on trial. This technique is subtle. It's not sarcasm, not mockery, not overt retaliation. It's detachment with precision. It's holding the gaze just a moment too long, answering in a way that closes the topic instead of opening it. It's a skill that makes others feel like they've walked into their own trap, and that's the key. In Machiavellian strategy, your aim is not to win the argument. It's to make the other side realize they've already lost at the moment they started it. You don't tell them they overplayed their hand. You let them feel it in the silence after their words, in the sudden shift of the room's attention, in the realization that they've just exposed themselves. When you master the mirror, you stop fearing accusations. Every attack becomes an opportunity to let the other person undress their own weaknesses in public. And nothing is more dangerous than a man who can turn your strike into your own wound. Next, we go deeper into why people defend themselves in the first place, and why the urge for clarity is the greatest trap in the game. The average person defends themselves because they believe the problem is a lack of clarity. If they just understood what I meant, if I can explain it the right way, if I repeat my side enough times. This is the emotional trap, confusing the desire to be understood with the need to be in control. In personal relationships, in business, in politics, people cling to the hope that if they present enough facts, logic will prevail. But in power dynamics, logic rarely decides the winner. The battlefield is emotional, and whoever controls the emotional frame wins. Clarity might solve misunderstandings in private life, in therapy sessions, or in academic debates. But in the open arena of influence, clarity is for those seeking relief. Control is for those seeking victory. Machiavelli's genius was in understanding that the human mind does not respond to truth as much as it responds to the context in which that truth is delivered. You can be right and still lose if you are forced into a defensive posture. You can be wrong and still win if you dictate the frame in which everyone else must think. The frame is everything. And explaining yourself almost always means stepping into someone else's frame. Consider a negotiation. If the other party questions your competence and you leap to explain your qualifications, you've already conceded the frame. You have the right to evaluate whether I belong here. If instead you remain still, redirect, or pose a question back to them, you shift the frame entirely. I am already in command. The question is whether you can keep up. Clarity can feel good in the moment. It can soothe the ego, reduce tension, make you feel like you've set the record straight. But control outlasts feelings. Control means that, regardless of the facts, the final impression belongs to you. And in any human arena, impressions outweigh explanations. This is why the Machiavellian willingly sacrifices being fully understood if it means keeping command of the frame. The misunderstood man is dangerous. He's unpredictable, unreadable, and difficult to attack. The fully understood man is easy to manipulate, because every weakness, every reaction, every belief is already on the table. So, when faced with the choice between clarity and control, the strategist chooses control every time. Clarity might earn you sympathy. Control earns you respect, fear, and lasting influence. And the more you choose control over clarity, the more you train yourself to resist the pull of emotional validation, the trap that destroys more leaders than any scandal ever could. Next, we move to the arena where these principles are tested most ruthlessly. The social frame, where every glance, pause, and word decides who truly holds the room. The true test of frame control doesn't happen in private. It happens when all eyes are on you, when a remark is thrown into the air and the entire room turns to see how you'll respond. In that moment, you're not just in a conversation, you're on a stage. And the audience isn't analyzing the words, they're reading the balance of power. Someone makes a subtle jab at your past. A colleague questions your idea with a smirk. A rival drops a line that could be taken as just a joke, but is sharpened enough to draw blood. This is where most people fail. They rush in to patch the damage, to smooth over the tension, to restore their reputation on the spot. But every second you spend defending is a second you've surrendered the role of leader to the role of defendant. The Machiavellian sees it differently. The social frame is the battlefield where silence and stillness are weapons sharper than words. You let the jab land without acknowledgement. You hold the pause for just a beat too long. You keep your body language composed. No fidgeting, no tension, no forced smile. This creates a shift in the room. The attack was supposed to trigger a reaction, but instead it hangs there, unsupported. And people start looking not at you, but at the one who threw it. Why? Because humans instinctively track confidence. In a group, whoever looks the least rattled, is perceived as the one in control. The attacker may have spoken, but the crowd senses that you own the moment. They start asking themselves, why didn't he respond? Does he know something we don't? Is he above this? Did that attempt just backfire? This is the silent burn, a technique where you let the weight of the room do your work for you. You don't need to counter the words. The group's shifting perception becomes your ally. The attacker begins to feel the heat they meant for you. They start justifying their comment, turning to others for validation. And with every extra word they speak, their own frame erodes. One of the cleanest executions of this tactic is inverting the frame with minimal words. Someone says, "You always act like you know everything." Instead of explaining yourself, you respond with calm detachment. Interesting observation. Or simply, "Is that how you see it?" Delivered with steady eye contact, this doesn't invite more debate. It subtly challenges the accuser's stability. The beauty of the social frame game is that you don't need to win the argument in the traditional sense. You win when the audience shifts its gaze from you to the person attacking you, wondering why they seem more emotional than you. You flip the frame without ever appearing to try. In high-stakes social environments, corporate boards, political debates, competitive industries, the one who holds the frame doesn't just survive attacks. They convert them into fuel. Every jab becomes a demonstration of their composure. Every accusation, a chance to showcase their dominance without lifting a sword. And once you've mastered the social frame, you can deploy the Machiavellian's three most precise tools: silence, deflection, and precision cuts. Each one designed to end the game before it even begins. In Machiavellian strategy, not reacting is only the beginning. Once you've trained yourself to resist the urge to defend, you can choose how to handle the attack with deliberate precision. There are three core tools, the tactical triad, that allow you to shut down an assault while reinforcing your authority: silence, deflection, and precision cuts. 1. Silence. The default weapon. Silence is the simplest, most underrated move in the arsenal. It demands no effort, but it has the highest potential to unnerve your opponent. A well-timed silence forces the other person to live in the discomfort of their own words. The longer you hold it, the more the crowd starts evaluating them instead of you. This works because people expect resistance. When they don't get it, they become uncertain about the moment, about themselves, about how others perceive them. In that uncertainty, they often keep talking, trying to fill the void. And with every unnecessary word they speak, they give away more of their insecurity. 2. Deflection. Changing the conversation without engaging the blow. Deflection is the art of redirecting the energy of an attack without absorbing it. You don't deny the claim, you don't accept it. You pivot the conversation entirely. Example. In a meeting, someone says, "I'm not sure your plan is realistic." Instead of defending, you reply, "Let's hear your plan then." In one sentence, you've moved from being questioned to being the questioner. You've shifted the frame, placing them under the same scrutiny they intended for you. The audience now sees them on trial, and you remain in control of the tempo. Deflection works because it prevents the attacker from anchoring the discussion in their chosen narrative. You don't fight their fire, you make them build their own. 3. Precision cuts. Short, sharp, status-asserting phrases. Precision cuts are verbal strikes designed to end the game instantly. They're not explanations. They're not emotional reactions. They are statements that signal unshakable self-possession. When someone says, "You're full of yourself," you answer, "Confidence upsets the insecure." They say, "You're fake," You respond, "I don't owe you authenticity." They say, "You think you're better than everyone." You reply, "No, I just don't think like everyone." Notice that none of these lines try to convince anyone. They don't address the truth of the accusation. They simply reassert dominance in a way that flips the implied weakness into a display of strength. When to use each tool. Silence is for moments when the attack is self-defeating, when the accuser's own words or tone will destroy them if left alone. Deflection is for moments when you want to regain the initiative and force the attacker to step into your arena. Precision cuts are for moments when the crowd needs a clear, decisive signal that you're untouchable. Mastering these three tools gives you control over the entire exchange. You can choose whether to leave the attacker exposed, make them carry their own weapon, or cut the game short with a single line. Once you wield the tactical triad with confidence, the next step is even more ruthless, turning the accusation into undeniable proof of the attacker's own weakness. That's where the advanced inversions come in. If the tactical triad gives you control of the moment, advanced inversions let you reverse the entire dynamic. This is where Machiavellian strategy moves from defense by design into attack without lifting a finger. The concept is simple. Make the accusation look like evidence of the accuser's own insecurity, weakness, or agenda. Think of it as power judo. You don't meet force with force. You redirect it so the attacker falls under the weight of their own momentum. Someone calls you arrogant. Strange how confidence makes some people uncomfortable. They say you're manipulative. Only people who can't be influenced say that. They call you fake. Everyone says that when they stop getting what they want. Each line does three things at once. It refuses to acknowledge the accusation as valid. It flips the implication, suggesting the problem lies entirely with them. It places them in a reactive position. They now have to defend themselves against your subtle implication. This tactic works because most attacks are emotional in origin. The attacker is hoping to provoke you into defending your image, which confirms to the crowd that the attack was worth making. When you invert, you deny them that confirmation and instead suggest, without outright stating, that their move reveals more about them than it does about you. In the digital arena, inversions are especially lethal. A post accusing you of being dangerous can be met with a line like, "People always call you dangerous when they can't control you." Not only does this reframe the accusation into a badge of honor, it sends a ripple through the audience. If they agree with the accuser, they risk looking like someone who fears what they can't control. Advanced inversions also shift the emotional weight. You're no longer carrying the energy of the attack. They are. They must now explain why your interpretation is wrong, which forces them into the very defensive position they wanted for you. And as they explain, the crowd starts to see them as the unstable one, the emotional one, the one who protests too much. The most refined form of inversion doesn't even require words. It's the calm look, the slight smile, the slow nod that says, "I heard you, and I see exactly where that came from." This silent inversion forces the accuser into a spiral of over-explaining, clarifying, and trying to read your mind, all while you remain immovable. Machiavelli's endgame here is not merely to neutralize the attack, but to let the attacker perform their own collapse in public. You take nothing from them directly. Instead, they spend their own social capital until there's nothing left. By the time the dust settles, you're not just untouched, you're elevated. When you can execute inversions naturally, you stop fearing public attacks altogether. You start to see them for what they really are. Free opportunities to display composure, reframe the narrative, and let your enemies sink themselves. From here, the evolution of power moves beyond resisting attacks. It becomes about transforming your presence so completely that Strength is impressive. Immunity is untouchable. Most people stop at strength. They want to be known as resilient, able to fight back, able to handle whatever's thrown at them. But the Machiavellian doesn't settle for resilience. He aims for a higher state, a presence so composed, so unmoved, that he's no longer perceived as someone you can even hit. Strength still reacts. It still flinches before it steadies itself. Immunity doesn't register the hit at all. Strength is the boxer who takes a punch and stays on his feet. Immunity is the opponent no one dares to swing at. And here's the paradox. Strength earns respect. Immunity creates hesitation. When you operate from immunity, you've moved beyond the court of public opinion. You're no longer playing for the crowd's approval or against your enemy's disapproval. You've stopped trying to manage what they think because you've learned the higher truth. The less you engage, the more people assume you have the leverage. Immunity is built over time through restraint. Every time you refuse to explain yourself, every time you remain still under pressure, every time you let an attack dissolve in silence, you're stacking invisible bricks in a fortress that others can't scale. You're creating a track record of composure that becomes your reputation. And soon, that reputation works for you. In a meeting, someone might think twice before taking a shot at you. Not because they've decided to respect you, but because they've seen others try and fail. In a social circle, your name carries an unspoken caution. He doesn't play defense. If you go after him, you'd better be ready for what happens next. The Machiavellian understands that this shift from strength to immunity changes the entire dynamic of power. At the level of strength, you're still proving yourself, even if you're winning. At the level of immunity, you don't have to prove anything. The game tilts in your favor before it begins. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means when you do speak, it's only to make a move, not to respond. Your words are no longer attempts to repair an image. They're tools to shape the battlefield. And when people realize that, they start measuring their words more carefully around you. Immunity makes you less of a target and more of a presence. Attacks don't stop because you've crushed all your enemies. They stop because no one wants to waste their social capital on a battle they know they'll lose. The final step, the highest evolution, is to refine this immunity into something even more powerful. Aura. A presence so steady, so secure, so far above petty noise, that accusations vanish before they even form. That's where we go next. Aura is the endgame. It's what happens when your immunity becomes so ingrained that it radiates from you before you say or do anything. People feel it in the way you enter a room, in the way you stand, in the way you look at them, or choose not to. It's the unspoken presence that tells everyone, "You can't move me." Unlike raw strength, aura isn't built in the heat of conflict. It's cultivated in every decision you make when no one is watching. It comes from the discipline of choosing not to defend yourself, not just in public confrontations, but in the small provocations that most people can't resist answering. Over time, those decisions create an energy field around you, a psychological gravity that bends interactions in your favor before words are exchanged. When you have aura, people hesitate before taking shots at you, not because they fear direct retaliation, but because they sense something they can't fully explain. It's the mystery of a person who never needs to prove, explain, or justify. In the minds of others, that mystery becomes danger. If he's not worried about clearing his name, what does he know that we don't? Aura also changes the way allies behave. When you never scramble to protect yourself, you invite others to step into that role voluntarily. The crowd that might have sat silent while you argued for your innocence now becomes your defense team, without you asking. They'll challenge unfair remarks, dismiss petty attacks, and protect your reputation, not out of obligation, but because they've bought into the myth you've built. And that's the real secret. Aura turns you into a symbol. Symbols are hard to attack because they're bigger than any single moment. They're not defined by one conversation or one accusation. They're defined by an ongoing narrative. And when you control your own narrative by refusing to play defense, that narrative becomes unshakable. The Machiavellian understands that aura doesn't mean you're invincible. It means you're untouchable in perception. Even when people dislike you, they measure their steps. Even when they want to challenge you, they do it cautiously on your terms. Aura doesn't stop conflict. It makes conflict play out in your shadow. The final commandment is this: never speak just to explain. Speak to move the game forward. Every silence, every look, every word must be deliberate. Because once you have aura, the smallest gesture carries weight. A glance can end a conversation. A pause can shift the room. And a single sentence, delivered without defense, can close a chapter before it begins. You don't need to crush your enemies. You don't need to clear your name. You don't need to convince the world of your goodness. You only need to stand in the certainty that you will not be moved. From that place, power stops being something you chase. It becomes something you are.